My name doesn't matter, but what I saw does. Everyone believes that John Gotti is the absolute power, but that's the first lie they want you to believe. For decades, the public, even the feds, bought into the image of the Teflon Don as the ultimate boss, the one pulling every string in New York City's concrete jungle, especially within the Gambino family. But that perception, the one splashed across every newspaper and whispered on every street corner, was nothing more than a meticulously crafted illusion. It was a smokescreen, thick and suffocating, designed to blind everyone to the true force operating in the shadows. I lived inside that world, saw its gears grinding, and what I discovered peeled back layers of deception to reveal a chilling truth. The man everyone feared wasn't the real king, merely a highly visible, very effective puppet. This isn't just about a hidden boss. It's about the very nature of power and how we're conditioned to look in the wrong places. My story isn't some Hollywood fantasy. It's a cold, hard recount of how I, a small cog in a vast criminal machine, stumbled upon an entity so elusive, so detached, that it redefined everything I thought I knew about organized crime. Who is this enigmatic figure, this ghost in the machine who truly pulled the strings behind not just the Gambino family, but subtly influenced the entire 5 families? How does an archetype of invisible intellectual power manage to control an empire built on overt violence and public bravado? And most importantly, what does this terrifying truth tell us about the enduring failure to dismantle organized crime at its core? My name is Salvatore Rossi, though you can call me Sal. I wasn't born into this life, didn't come from a long line of made men. My path into the American Mafia was paved with desperation, not ambition. It was 1985, and my old man, a good man who made a bad bet, had racked up a crippling gambling debt that threatened to cost us everything. Our home, our livelihood, our very dignity. I was young, scared, and saw no other way to protect my family from the wolves at the door. That vulnerability, that raw need, made me a prime target for recruitment, but it also gave me a unique vantage point. While the 5 families expanded their illicit enterprises, generating an estimated $500 million annually, I was learning that the public face of brutal violence was just that, a face. I watched the public spectacle unfold, the loud displays of power, the arrests, the headlines screaming about Gotti's latest move. Everyone bought into the narrative of the boss of bosses who ruled with an iron fist, whose temper was as legendary as his suits. But even then, amidst the bravado and the chaos, I started to notice subtle discrepancies. There were decisions made that didn't quite fit Gotti's impulsive style, strategies that felt too cold, too calculating, too corporate. It was like seeing the strings of a puppet show. But the puppeteer was always just out of sight. My journey into that world, from a desperate recruit to a trusted driver, slowly revealed that the true strength of this empire lay not in the public spectacle, but in a silent, almost invisible organizational structure far removed from the headlines. My name is Salvatore Rossi, and my path into that world wasn't born from ambition or a romanticized notion of loyalty, but from a desperate, gnawing fear. It was 1985, and my father, a good man who worked hard but harbored a weakness for the track, had amassed a crippling gambling debt. The loan sharks, they weren't just names. They were faces I saw in the neighborhood, men whose smiles didn't reach their eyes, whose politeness was a thinly veiled threat. They promised to take our house, the only home my family had ever known, and leave us with nothing. I was young, barely out of my teens, and utterly terrified. I saw no other way to shield my family from that looming catastrophe than to step into the very jaws of the beast, to offer myself as a pawn in their game. That raw, primal need made me vulnerable, but in a strange way, it also granted me a unique, unfiltered vantage point. The entry wasn't a grand initiation ceremony, no blood oaths under a full moon. It was quiet, insidious. I got in through a local bookie, a low-level associate who'd seen my old man's spiral and my own frantic desperation. My first tasks were mundane, running envelopes, making collections from small-time debtors, delivering packages that felt too heavy, too silent. There was no glamour, no immediate sense of power, just the constant low hum of danger, a pervasive understanding that you were now part of something immense and unforgiving. I learned quickly that a polite knock on a door could carry more weight than a fist, and that the true power wasn't in the loud threats. but in the unspoken implied consequences. People's eyes would shift when they realized who I was working for, a subtle but palpable change in their demeanor. In those early days, the hierarchy I saw was brutal, clear, and deeply ingrained. There were the enforcers, the street soldiers, the capos barking orders, and then at the top, the whispered name, Gotti, the Teflon Don. His image was everywhere, in the newspapers, on TV, in the hushed conversations on street corners. He was the public face of the Gambino family, the man who commanded fear and respect, whose temper was legendary, whose suits were as sharp as his reputation was formidable. I believed, like everyone else, that he was the absolute power, the one pulling every string in New York City's underworld. Every order, every decision, every display of force seemed to emanate directly from him, reinforcing the narrative of a singular, all-powerful boss. As I proved myself reliable, quiet, and discreet, I was given more sensitive responsibilities. I became a driver, a position that, while seemingly simple, was a coveted role. It meant you were trusted, close enough to overhear things, to be present in rooms where decisions were made. My days became a blur of endless driving through the city, waiting in parked cars for hours, ferrying capos and made men to their meetings. It was an exercise in patience and observation. I learned to read the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken signals, the way a certain look could convey an entire conversation. I was a fly on the wall, absorbing the rhythms and the hidden undercurrents of their world, slowly building a mental map of their operations. But even amidst the roaring bravado and the public spectacle, I started noticing discrepancies. There were decisions made that didn't quite fit Gotti's impulsive, hot-headed style. Strategies that felt too cold, too calculating, too corporate. It was like watching a master illusionist, knowing there was a trick, but unable to pinpoint the exact moment of deception. Sometimes, a seemingly minor issue would be handled with an almost surgical precision, devoid of the usual emotional outburst or public display of force. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but to someone immersed in the day-to-day operations, it felt like a different hand was at play, guiding the puppets from behind the curtain. The first crack in my understanding, the moment the illusion truly began to crumble, occurred in a nondescript midtown office building. Not a fancy restaurant, not a smoky backroom, but a bland, corporate-looking suite that could have belonged to any legitimate business. I was driving Gotti that day, and the atmosphere in the car was unusually subdued. There was a tension, a quiet anticipation that felt different from the usual pre-meeting jitters. Gotti, usually boisterous and commanding, was quiet, almost contemplative. He kept checking his watch, a flicker of something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. Not fear, not exactly, but a deep, uncharacteristic deference. I expected him to stride in, full of bluster, ready to dominate any room. When we arrived, the silence inside the office was unnerving. Then, a man emerged from an inner room. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a simple, understated dark suit. His hair was neatly combed, his glasses perched on his nose. He had a quiet demeanor, an almost professorial air, utterly unremarkable. There was no entourage, no fanfare, just this solitary figure. My initial thought was confusion. I'd never seen him before, never heard his name whispered in any context related to the family. Why was Gotti here in this sterile office, waiting for this quiet, unassuming man who seemed more like an accountant than a power broker? What followed shattered everything I thought I knew about the Gambino family, about power, about John Gotti. The Teflon Don, the man who made hardened capos tremble, acted with an almost nervous deference. He took notes, nodding intently, his usual booming voice reduced to hushed tones. The quiet man, who I would later hear referred to only as the chess master, outlined complex logistical plans, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze unwavering and chillingly dispassionate. There were no threats, no raised voices, just a cold, analytical discussion of strategies, of assets, of vulnerabilities. It was clear who was truly in charge, who was the superior. Gotti was not the king. He was a subordinate, a very effective, very visible puppet. The meeting ended, and Gotti, still subdued, simply nodded and walked out, leaving me to process what I had just witnessed. The image of the Teflon Don had been meticulously crafted, a smokescreen designed to blind everyone to the true force operating in the shadows. This quiet, unassuming man, The chess master was the unseen hand guiding the entire operation with a chilling dispassion. The world I thought I understood, built on overt violence and public bravado, was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. That day, in that unremarkable office, the first seed of doubt was planted, and I began to understand that the true strength of this empire lay not in the public spectacle, but in a silent, almost invisible organizational structure. After that Midtown meeting, my perspective shifted, slowly, painfully. It wasn't just about a hidden boss. It was about a completely different way of operating, a modus operandi that defied every street-level instinct I'd developed. The chess master didn't rely on intimidation or the public spectacle that Gotti so skillfully orchestrated. His power was intellectual, strategic, rooted in an understanding of systems and leverage points that ran deeper than any concrete foundation in this city. He operated like a CEO of a multinational corporation, dismantling problems with surgical precision, calculating risks and rewards with chilling detachment. This was a man who understood that true control didn't come from fear of a bullet, but from the quiet, absolute fear of financial, social, and existential obliteration. It was a slow burn, this realization, but each incident chipped away at the illusion. One particular incident hammered this home: the case of old Frankie, the fixer Costello. Frankie was a capo, a made man, and he'd skimmed a hefty sum from a union pension fund, a cardinal sin in our world. Traditionally, this would warrant a brutal public example, a message delivered with a baseball bat or a silenced pistol. But the chess master handled it differently. Frankie was summoned to one of those unassuming corporate suites, the kind you'd never associate with our kind of business. I drove him, and I saw the fear in Frankie's eyes, a fear far deeper than any I'd seen before. He emerged pale, shaking, but unharmed. Days later, without a single shot fired, without a whisper of violence, Frankie Costello's entire crew was absorbed by a rival family. His assets, properties, businesses, even his pension, seized, and he was left utterly destitute, a ghost. In his own city, he simply vanished, not into a grave, but into the anonymity of total ruin. It wasn't a gangland hit. It was a corporate restructuring, a hostile takeover executed with surgical precision and devoid of emotion. This wasn't punishment. It was a strategic dismantling, designed to maximize profit from his downfall and send a terrifying message to anyone else considering a similar miscalculation. It showed me that the chess master didn't just end lives, he ended existences. Then there was the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Eleanor Vance. She was stubborn, incorruptible, a genuine threat to our operations, and everyone expected Gotti to order a solution to her problem. But the chess master had a different approach. He didn't use threats or bribery. Instead, he orchestrated a campaign of subtle, relentless pressure, leveraging a network of seemingly legitimate contacts. Suddenly, Vance's extended family faced multiple simultaneous IRS audits. Her aging parents' property was embroiled in bizarre zoning disputes. A frivolous but highly publicized lawsuit was anonymously funded against her husband's small business. There was no direct crime, no violence, just a slow, suffocating squeeze that left no fingerprints. Eventually, Eleanor Vance resigned, citing personal reasons, a victim not of a bullet, but of a strategic dismantling of her entire life, piece by painstaking piece. It was a chilling display of control, a testament to the chess master's ability to manipulate the legitimate world to serve his illicit ends. These incidents, these quiet, devastating operations, taught me the true nature of power. It wasn't the loud roar of Gotti. It was the silent, almost imperceptible hum of a system designed to crush you without a trace, leaving no evidence, only a void. The real threat wasn't the visible mob. It was the invisible hand, guiding everything from the deepest shadows, utterly unassailable by conventional means. My friend, if you could even call him that in this life, was a kid named Marco. He wasn't made, just an associate, a runner, like I was in the early days. Marco had a laugh that could fill a room and a loyalty as thick as his Bronx accent. We'd shared too many late-night coffees and too many anxious hours waiting in parked cars, our breath fogging the windows. He was a good kid, perhaps too trusting, too open. a stark contrast to the coiled snakes we worked among. His only real flaw was a tendency to loosen his tongue after a few too many beers, a common enough vice that in our world could prove fatal. I saw him as a mirror of my younger, more naive self, before the edges of this life had fully dulled my senses. The minor logistical detail Marco let slip was so insignificant, so utterly mundane, it almost defies belief. A new drug route, specifically a change in the pickup point for a shipment coming in from the docks, a slight alteration in the schedule. He'd mentioned it to a girl he was trying to impress at a bar, a girl who, unbeknownst to him, had a cousin working for a rival crew. It wasn't a betrayal, not an act of malice, just a foolish, drunken boast. But in the chess master's world, where every piece on the board was meticulously placed and every movement anticipated, even the faintest ripple in the carefully controlled waters was an unacceptable risk, a perceived threat to his invisible network. The order came down from Capo Sant'Angelo, delivered with a chillingly calm demeanor that spoke volumes. Sant'Angelo, a man who usually barked orders, looked almost regretful, his voice a low, almost reluctant hum. "Marco's a loose end, Sal. The chess master wants him cleaned up. Quietly. No fuss, no spectacle. Just gone." The words hung in the stale air of the smoke-filled room, heavy and final. He knows too much, even if he doesn't realize it. A potential liability. My gut twisted, a cold knot of dread seizing me. This wasn't Gotti's impulsive rage. This was a surgical command, a precise removal, stripped of any emotion or personal vendetta. My mind reeled, grasping for a way out, a reason, any loophole. Marco? For something so trivial? I tried to argue, to suggest a different solution, anything but this. Sant'Angelo just shook his head, his eyes distant. "It's not up for discussion, Sal. You know the rules. You know who's asking." The implication was clear. Refusal wasn't an option. My own life, my family's safety, hung in the balance. The cold, precise logic of the chess master didn't allow for sentiment, for loyalty beyond his own chilling objectives. This wasn't about justice or vengeance. It was about efficiency, about eliminating the smallest, most remote possibility of compromise to his intricate web. I found Marco that night, just as I was told. The details of what happened are etched into my memory, a permanent scar. It wasn't loud, wasn't violent in the way you see in movies. It was quiet, clinical, a job. There was no struggle, no last words, just a sudden, brutal finality. I remember the look in his eyes, not of understanding, but of confusion, of a dawning horror that he couldn't comprehend. It was the same dispassionate efficiency that had dismantled Frankie Costello's life, that had suffocated Eleanor Vance's career. But this time, it was personal. This time, it was someone I knew, someone who was just like me, a disposable cog in this vast, emotionless machine. The immediate aftermath was a blur of cold, sweat, and a nauseating emptiness. Marco's face, his confused eyes haunted me. All the previous lessons, the intellectual understanding of the chess master's true power, solidified into a horrifying, visceral truth. If Marco, for such an insignificant slip, could be erased without a second thought, then what was my own life worth? What about my family, the very reason I'd stepped into this world? I wasn't protected by Gotti's bravado. I was exposed to a far more insidious threat, a silent, calculating force that valued human life less than a misplaced decimal point in a ledger. That night, staring at the ceiling in my cramped apartment, the decision solidified, hard and unyielding as concrete. I had to get out. Every fiber of my being screamed for escape. The fear that had driven me into this life, the fear for my family, now became the relentless engine pushing me to break free. The chess master didn't deal in threats or violence. He dealt in quiet obliteration, and I realized, with a clarity that chilled me to the bone, that my own life and the lives of those I loved were equally expendable under his cold, precise logic. This wasn't just a turning point. It was the limit. The thought of escape was terrifying, almost suicidal. The chess master's reach was everywhere, his eyes unseen but omnipresent. But the alternative, remaining a pawn in his game, waiting for my own inevitable, dispassionate termination, was far worse. I began to plan, meticulously, silently, like a prisoner digging a tunnel with a spoon. Every conversation, every errand, every observation became a piece of the puzzle. I knew I was living on borrowed time, every breath a risk. But the image of Marco's bewildered eyes, the chilling understanding of my own disposability, fueled a quiet, desperate resolve that transcended all fear. The decision to leave, born from Marco's silent, unceremonious end, solidified into a burning, relentless drive. I knew the chess master didn't forget, didn't forgive, and certainly didn't leave loose ends untied. My life, and the future of my family, depended on a meticulous plan, one executed with the same dispassionate precision that marked his operations. For years, I had been squirreling away cash, not in large, traceable sums, but in small, untraceable increments. A few hundred here from a collection I miscounted, 1,000 there from a forgotten envelope, careful not to draw attention. It was a slow, agonizing process. Every dollar a heavy weight of risk, every hidden stash a secret burden. This wasn't about getting rich, it was about buying freedom, brick by agonizing brick, under the constant suffocating fear of discovery. Finding reliable contacts outside the family's suffocating grip was like searching for a needle in a haystack made of lies. I couldn't trust anyone within the organization, not after Marco. My mind went back to an old high school buddy, Tommy, who'd veered into the murky world of petty fixes and illicit paperwork after a stint in the army. He wasn't connected to the five families, operated on the fringes, dealing with small-time smugglers and low-level crooks. It was a terrifying gamble, trusting someone with my life, knowing a single slip could mean my end, but he was my only shot. Through him, I started quietly laying the groundwork for new identities, a clean slate, and a path out of the city, far from the concrete jungle I'd called home. The night I left, the city felt different, sharper, every shadow a potential threat, every distant siren a harbinger of doom. There was no grand farewell, no dramatic chase, just the quiet click of a lock and the roar of a bus engine taking me away from everything I'd ever known. I carried a small, nondescript duffel bag, a new name in my pocket, and the phantom weight of Marco's death on my shoulders. The plan was simple: disappear into the vast anonymity of the American landscape, changing locations every few months, using burner phones, and adopting a new persona with each move. I'd severed every tie, burned every bridge, leaving behind a carefully constructed void where Salvatore Rossi used to be. The adrenaline was a bitter taste in my mouth, but beneath it, a fragile, desperate hope flickered. Those first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels, greasy diners, and the constant nauseating fear of recognition. Every unfamiliar face felt like a threat. Every car that slowed nearby sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, haunted by the specter of the chess master's unseen eyes. I adopted a new name, worked odd jobs under the table, living a life of quiet desperation and perpetual vigilance. The physical toll was immense, but the mental strain was far worse. I was free, yes, but it felt like a freedom granted by a very long leash, the other end still held by an unseen hand. The city, and the life I'd left, felt both miles away and terrifyingly close, a persistent phantom limb. As weeks bled into months and months into a year, the immediate paralyzing fear began to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of security. I'd settled into a small, nondescript town in the Midwest, a place where no one knew my name or cared to ask. I found steady work, mundane and unremarkable, just as I'd planned. The constant looking over my shoulder slowly eased, replaced by the quiet rhythm of a normal life. I started to believe I had truly done it, that I had outrun the shadow, that the chessmaster had either forgotten me or simply deemed me too insignificant to bother pursuing. It was a dangerous thought, a comforting lie I desperately wanted to believe. The illusion grew stronger with each passing season. The faces of the family, Gotti's bravado, the chilling dispassion of the chess master, they all began to fade into a distant nightmare, replaced by the mundane realities of rent, groceries, and a quiet, anonymous existence. I allowed myself to breathe, to believe in a future that wasn't dictated by fear or the cold logic of an unseen hand. The quiet anonymity became a comforting blanket, a testament to my survival. I was Sal Rossi, a ghost to the world I'd left behind, and for a brief, deceptive period, I truly believed I was free, that the game was over, and I had somehow won. The quiet rhythm of anonymity had become my shield, a comforting hum against the lingering echoes of fear. I'd spent 2 years in this sleepy Midwest town, working honest jobs, breathing air that didn't reek of deceit or danger. I'd even allowed myself a small flicker of hope, a fragile belief that I had truly outrun the ghost in the machine, that Salvatore Rossi was just a forgotten name in a city far away. Then came the newspaper delivery. Not the local rag I subscribed to, but a copy of the New York Times, folded precisely, left on my doorstep. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't subscribed, and no one here knew my old habits. On the front page, a small, almost imperceptible detail in an article about a minor financial scandal. A specific obscure code word, one only the chess master's inner circle would use in print to signal a subtle, devastating move. It was a whisper from the grave, a chilling reminder that I was never truly gone. The next morning, the phantom limb sensation returned, a cold dread creeping into my bones. I saw him from across the street, sitting in a parked sedan, reading a book. He wasn't a made man. No flashy suits, no obvious swagger. He looked like a retired professor or a quiet salesman, neatly dressed, his presence utterly benign. But the way he held his posture, the subtle, almost imperceptible alertness in his eyes, it screamed, them. My stomach clenched. He didn't approach immediately. He simply waited, a statue of patience, letting the knowledge sink in, allowing the fear to fester. This wasn't a chase. It was a summons. This wasn't about being caught. It was about being reminded. He was the quiet, precise messenger sent to deliver a truth far more terrifying than any bullet. He finally approached me at the diner, slid into the booth opposite, a faint scent of old paper and something metallic clinging to him. His voice was soft, unassuming, barely above the clatter of plates. "Sal," he said, his eyes devoid of malice or any emotion at all. "A long time, isn't it? We knew you'd find your way. We always knew where you were." My throat was dry. Words caught. He leaned forward slightly. "Your escape, Sal? It was permitted. A small test, perhaps. A demonstration of loyalty of sorts. You served your purpose. Now, there's a new one." He didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. It was a statement of fact, a dispassionate accounting. My freedom was a carefully managed illusion, every step monitored, every breath accounted for. I was still on the board, just a different square. The air in the diner grew thick, suffocating. My mind raced, trying to find a loophole, a sliver of hope, but there was none. The chess master hadn't pursued me out of rage or vengeance. He had simply allowed me to believe I was free, letting me exhaust myself running from a shadow that was always, always there. The entire escape, every desperate step, every hidden dollar, every new identity, it had all been part of his grand design, a perverse exercise in control. I wasn't just a former soldier, I was a living, breathing testament to his absolute power, a pawn he could activate at any time, anywhere. The quiet man across from me wasn't an enforcer. He was a mirror, reflecting the chilling reality that my life, from the moment I stepped into that world, had never truly been my own. He left as quietly as he arrived, leaving behind no note, no explicit instructions, just the chilling understanding that the game was far from over. My sentence wasn't a bullet. It was this perpetual leash, this knowledge that I could be pulled back at any moment, for any purpose. My freedom, I now understood, was conditional, a carefully curated illusion. I could continue to live my anonymous life, but the shadow of the chess master would forever loom, a silent, unseen warden. Every decision, every interaction, every fleeting moment of peace would be tainted by the knowledge that I was merely existing at his silent sufferance. This wasn't escape. It was a different kind of prison, one without walls, but with chains forged from absolute invisible power. My life was no longer mine. It was a demonstration. My journey from a desperate kid to a witness of the chess master's chilling reality has revealed a profound, unsettling truth about power itself. It's not about the loud roar, the public spectacle, or the brutal displays of force that Gotti embodied. That was merely a distraction, a carefully constructed illusion for the masses and the feds. The chess master operates on an entirely different plane, one of pure intellect and strategic calculation. His power isn't derived from fear of a bullet, but from the quiet, absolute dread of financial, social, and existential obliteration. He controls by manipulating systems, leveraging vulnerabilities, and orchestrating ruin without a trace, making him untouchable. This is why the fight against organized crime often feels like a losing battle. We're constantly chasing shadows, while the true puppeteer remains unseen, pulling the strings from an impenetrable veil of silence. This understanding makes the so-called war on drugs and the endless pursuit of visible bosses seem like a tragic farce. How can you dismantle an empire when you don't even know who the emperor is? Law enforcement focuses on the public faces, the narco spectacles and mafia showmen who crave fame, while the true corporate brain, the one ensuring longevity, efficiency, and adaptability, remains untouched. The chess master represents a chilling evolution in organized crime, a model that seeks absolute power through absolute invisibility. It's the difference between a street gang and a clandestine multinational corporation operating with the precision of a shadow government. As long as the world continues to pursue the loudmouths and the visible puppets, the true masters will continue to win the game, their operations unassailable, their influence silently pervasive. And so, here I am. My escape wasn't an escape at all. It was a transition from one form of captivity to another, a controlled existence under an invisible leash. The chess master didn't need to hunt me down. He simply needed to remind me that I am always within his reach, a pawn he can activate at any moment. My freedom is conditional, a carefully curated illusion, granted only because it serves his purpose to have me out here, living proof of his absolute unseen dominion. Every quiet day, every anonymous meal, every fleeting moment of peace is tainted by the chilling knowledge that my life is not truly my own. This isn't freedom. It's a different kind of prison, one without walls, but with chains forged from absolute invisible power. My true sentence is to live with this truth, forever a ghost in my own life, haunted by the unseen hand that still pulls my strings.